spitball over the Monkees real quick?
Let's do the Monkees.
So much like Matt dropped a little Easter egg, as they say in DVDs, not really much of a thing anymore. Back in the day, they're the Easter eggs, right, where you drop stuff in to get hidden content. Matt had dropped a Sweetheart of the Rodeo reference in early, and sure enough, here it is. And I had sort of dropped in an Easter egg in an earlier episode about how I thought the Monkees were the most underrated band of the 60s in terms of their reputation versus the music that they put out. And sure enough, we had an opportunity to do some new content, and so we both kind of went right there and found those Easter eggs for you. So I think with the Monkees, I think a lot of people are mostly familiar with the narrative of the Monkees. Would that include you as well, Matt? The basics of what the Monkees were?
Would that be that they were a manufactured band for a television show to mock the Beatles?
Well, I had a lot of edge to it right there, but let me go back.
I didn't mean that.
So basically, they're trying to create a TV, and I'm saying basically a lot recently, so I apologize. They're trying to create a TV show. They want to do an American version of the Beatles, like Matt said, but they also want the band to be definitively a pop act that can release their own albums. So what happens is they do an open casting call where about a jillion people, including many famous people. It's kind of funny to see who did not make the Monkees, who tried out for it. It would really give you more of an appreciation of how the gig was not just a fluff gig, you know what I mean, based on the musical talent that went out for it. But 4 people are selected. Those 4 people, for those that don't know, 2 of them were trained musicians who played music, and that was Michael Nesmith and Peter Tork. So while they were in this manufactured band, both of those 2 gentlemen had backgrounds in music, so they were musicians.
John, was Mike Nesmith's? I remember taking a class in college. Was Mike Nesmith's mother? Do you have any background on her that she was?
She invented liquid paper, and so he was loaded.
Right,
I'm not kidding. She invented liquid paper, so basically he got to live the life of an art kid, basically.
Which is whiteout, right? That's whiteout.
Yeah, basically it's whiteout, exactly. So he was sort of a rich kid, but with musical talent, who had a lot of skills and had written songs that were well regarded before joining the Monkees. And Peter Tork was a guy that could play a bunch of instruments very proficiently. And actually later in his career, he would actually play on George Harrison albums as a musician. So he had enough chops to be able to do that. And then the other 2 members of the band were Mickey Dolenz, who's all over the first couple albums as the primary singer. And he was a child actor, believe it or not. So he was as much cast for the acting portion of the Monkees TV show, but he could sing, as anybody who's heard the first couple Monkees albums can attest to. And Davy Jones was a Broadway actor who had actually been nominated for some Tonys. So he was a trained singer. The first couple albums are primarily tied into season 1 of the Monkees television show. It ran for 2 years. Season 1's episodes, all of the music is written by pretty high-profile songwriters and played by studio musicians. And then the Monkees act in the show and then sing the songs, but they are not performing the instrumentation, writing the lyrics themselves. So anyway, what happens is it sort of spins out of control for the Svengali who created the band, and they say, hey, listen, we want to start writing our own material, at which point the person who put the band together, and I apologize, it's slipping my name, I'll look it up as we're talking right here, but he says, yeah, no thanks, I want to just continue to have Don Kirshner, there you go, is the name of the gentleman. So he's like, yeah, you know what, I want to continue to have Tommy Boyce and Bobby Hart, 2 well-regarded songwriters, keep writing stuff, and we'll also bring in some hired guns, who ended up being like Carole King and Harry Nilsson and Neil Diamond, just to give you an idea of the type of people they were having write songs for them. And so they said, no, we really want to do it. And they end up pulling a power play, at which I thought one of the funniest things was at one point, to try to keep them happy, Don Kirshner just decides on the spot to write them each a check that he hands them, which is the equivalent of $1.5 million in today's money, just to say, here's how much money you've made, basically shut up and play the stuff we've done. each.
Wow.
So they were selling albums, my man.
Yeah.
So anyway, they still are like, nope, we're not fulfilled, and they end up turfing Don Kirshner. And in a funny side note, Don Kirshner ends up so scarred by the experience that he decides to create the Archies. And do you know about the Archies, Matt?
It's a comic, isn't it?
Yeah, well, not Archie, the comic. The Archies are
Oh, is that a band?
named as such because they're a band, but the band is cartoon characters playing songs written by songs. So basically, imagine if you take the Monkees, but instead of real people, you made them cartoons. So his idea was that the cartoons can't turn on him, right? So that's what he ends up. That's what he ends up doing because the Monkees turn on him.
Unless he pisses off the voice actors.
Yeah, right, like The Simpsons, right? So yeah, he probably hadn't thought that out all the way. But anyway, the Monkees then release an album called Headquarters where they play all the instruments and legitimately do play all the instruments. I think what's very interesting is that in a lot of cases, they were basically just learning the instruments on the fly. So like Mickey Dolenz just learned the drums. Davy Jones knew how to play the drums a little bit, but they figured it would be easier to teach Mickey Dolenz the drums. So they just then had, Davy Jones learn some guitar.
So they didn't know how to play those instruments until they started the show.
Michael Nesmith and Peter Tork did know how to play their instruments and were actually very proficient in them.
So but those guys, so Davy Jones and Mickey Dolenz must have been like really, I don't know, charismatic actors or something, because I'm sure that there were other people auditioning that
could sing extremely well.
Yeah, they did do a lot of singing. Right.
Yep. So, but yeah, I like we said, Mickey Dolenz was a child actor of some renown, and Davy Jones was a Broadway
actor, right?
Broadway actor who was not just a guy; he was, nominated for a Tony. So they had that thing. But I do think it's interesting that Mickey Dolenz becomes a pretty decent drummer, all things considered, on Headquarters, and Davy Jones holds his own in terms of doing what he needs to do on that album as well. And they basically learned on the fly.
Did he play keyboards as well? Did Davy Jones do keyboards?
I'm not 100% sure who did the keyboard.
I thought he was at the piano at Daydream Believer video in the Daydream.
Who
knows if he was actually playing?
Well, and yeah, I was going to say they still, and that kind of gets into this album a little bit, because during this album they're still doing some playing, especially Michael Nesmith and Peter Tork. But at this point, Mickey Dolenz is kind of like, I don't really want to do drums anymore, and he'd become obsessed with this new thing called the Moog synthesizer, which you hear quite a bit in this album, and that we'll hear quite a bit in albums in the late 60s too. But they were actually one of the first artists to use the Moog synthesizer, and it actually was Mickey Dolenz's own Moog synthesizer. There were like, I think it was 30, somewhere around there, that were in the entire world, and he actually owned one of them. So he was basically more interested in that than he was in playing the drums. So he's messing around with that, and then they decide with Davy Jones, listen, we might as well just have him sing, because why,
Yeah.
And then when you're getting songs written for you by the songwriters that they did, why wouldn't you just take those songs and run with it? But of course, therein lies why the Monkees' reputation is what it is, as opposed to what I believe it should be. And that is that a lot of people say they are a manufactured band, they don't write their own stuff, and they don't play their own instruments. And with the exception of Headquarters and, parts of this, it largely is true, especially for the first two albums. Mm-hmm. And therein lies the ultimate question with the Monkees. Can you appreciate the Monkees as a band that churned out hits and took advantage of great songwriters and knew what to do and sang well, or do you view them as a novelty act that doesn't have much heft? Before I get into my take, Matt, where do you stand on the Monkees coming into this album?
Well, this is the only album that I now know, and I didn't know this up until a couple of days ago.
Like, you did not never have listened to the Monkees before?
Not an album format. I mean, I knew their singles, right? Okay. I watched the TV. I think, if I'm not mistaken, the TV show might have been on at Nick at Night or something, Nickelodeon, when we were kids.
So it's real quick. How the Monkees got a renaissance was in 1986. MTV played the entire run of the show over a couple days.
Yep.
And it became like a novelty act, and then Nick at Night picked it up and ran it for many years. So yeah, I'm certain, growing up that would be something that you did.
Yeah. So I watched the show. I knew some of the songs. Obviously, Daydream Believer was a huge hit for theirs. Did they do I'm a Believer too, right? That was like a yep. So some of those hits I knew.
That's on Headquarters. I'm a Believer. Daydream Believer was actually supposed to be on this album, but they held it back for the next album.
And I think Smash Mouth ruined that song for me.
Well, we're gonna yeah.
But so I knew some of the singles. I never really cared or heard anybody talk about how good they are or how underrated they are until I think I met you. I think Jon, you hold the position of the person that's really bearing the torch for the Monkees. And so going into this record, I didn't really know much of their stuff or their history. I didn't know. I knew kind of like they kind of shared some writing. I knew a little bit about Mike Nesmith being in the music business or being a writer beforehand, but I didn't know a whole lot about who was writing, who was singing, who was playing what, until I started looking a little bit more into this album.
So, hey, let's take the suspense out of this, since I picked this album, so I'm sure that you know that I like it quite a bit. I have no idea how you're going to feel about this album because we just did the Beach Boys last episode. They're a pop band. You were not super high on it. I know you love the Beatles, and certainly the Monkees are doing Revolver on this album in their own way. What'd you think of this album?
I did like this. Okay. And I also want to say I didn't dislike the Beach Boys record.
I know.
I didn't dislike that. But I did like this. And I found some really strong songs on here. Speaking of country,
yes.
What Am I Doing Hanging Around is a country song.
And a freaking great song.
It's my favorite song on the album. It's my favorite. It's my favorite track on the record. And I think that it's one of those examples again that it definitely sounds country, but if you took that guitar part and put a banjo on it, it would really sound country.
So Michael Nesmith is in some ways like the Eric Hillman for the Monkees in that he loves country rock, and so he's always trying to wedge country parts into Monkees songs. Even in the earlier albums, there's some vestiges of, certainly not as bold or direct country as the Byrds were doing, right?
Yeah.
And Sweetheart of the Rodeo, but it's here, and it very much. And this is by far the most Michael Nesmith sings on any Monkees album. He's got 5 songs. Normally he has 2 tops on an album, but he's got 5, and I would say at least 3 of the 5 have country tinges.
So he's the Chris Hillman, huh?
He is the Chris Hillman. I'm sorry, I say Eric. Chris Hillman. Yes, he is this. Yes, the person who has those tendencies and tries to build them in.
Interesting.
Songs.
No, when that came on, I was going, holy crap! And this came out before Sweetheart of the Rodeo and the submarine band, the International Submarine Band. So actually, and I did a quick check for a couple of things before we started, and and somebody wrote somewhere that this was actually the prototype country rock song that was kind of predated some other ones. So,
I can't
it's
speak
the internet,
to that.
though. Yeah, exactly.
I can't speak to that, but I can tell you it's a lot more of a country rock song than what Sweetheart of the Rodeo is. Yes. It's a rock song that has country elements for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
Yep.
So I really did like that. I thought the 3 songs to open this are very strong. I really like the second song, and actually,
She Hangs Out. Yeah,
it's actually kind of funny because now that we're doing this a week after doing the Beach Boys, is this the same sister that the Beach Boys were talking about? And they're just from the other perspective, of the
Here is where the Monkees crack me up, because the Monkees have some very sardonic elements to them. A subversive probably would be an even better word.
Yeah.
So Davy Jones is known as the sweetest punch teen idol, right? And they give him 4 songs on this album to sing, right? Mm-hmm. And 3 of the 4 are just absolutely, raunchy. Most notably, the most famous one is the Cuddly Toy. The song at number 5 is about an orgy, and it's very clearly about. Is it
really?
Oh, absolutely. And if you were to look at the lyrics, it absolutely is.
Yeah,
She Hangs Out is just basically about Davy Jones trying to sleep with somebody's sister. Yeah. And Star Collector is basically about just getting it on with groupies.
Right.
And so it's just funny how, angelic Davy Jones is singing these songs that are just, raunchy. And I think it's also funny that the Star Collector song, about trying to get with as many groupies as possible is written by Carole King, she of I Am Woman fame, which cracks me up. And, Cuddly Toys by Harry Nielsen, who's pretty straight-laced in some ways, but, we talked about what that's about. So there's a lot of wink, wink, nod, nod stuff in this that I think is deeper than you think.
Yeah. I got a kick out of that. That was pretty fun. But I thought it's just very catchy. It's very, I don't know if I want to say funky or something, but there's like a kind of it's just a very good, solid opening. And the door into summer. So there's a couple songs on here that, after listening a couple of times, reminded me of other artists that I could see them doing it. And I felt like the door into summer could have been a Crosby, Stills and Nash song.
Oh, absolutely.
Without the harmonies. There's not really any harmonies there, but it just seemed like I'm just waiting for a harmony to kick in. It sounded like Stephen Stills taking the lead, and then and then David Crosby and Graham Nash just kind of taking the side seat.
By the way, good catch there, because guess who one of the guys was who tried out to make the Monkees, didn't make it, and became good friends with multiple members of the band?
Stephen Stills?
If you guess Stephen Stills, you are correct.
Wow.
So,
yeah, I could. That was at like the second or third listen, I'm going Crosby, Stills, and Nash, which I thought was kind of interesting. I thought that Hard to Believe. I think that was that a Davy Jones?
That's a Davy Jones song. Yep. So that's the only one that's not about raunchy sex.
So that seemed to be. I was hearing a little early Bee Gees in that song.
Absolutely.
But
before the Bee Gees.
Yeah, right. That's fair, because the Bee Gees were probably, this is 67, right? So the Bee Gees were a little bit later than that, I think.
Early 69, I think, was their first album. So and it was called One. Yeah.
And it seemed like even a little Barry Gibbish. I could see it, because Barry Gibb's got obviously a very distinct voice, but I was hearing a little bit of that, and it's got some of the songs like Hard to Believe, and I think, I'm not sure if it's Daily Nightly, but it's almost got like a 70s orchestration going on. Like you could see like a proto kind of 70s, production there a little bit. And then I also, no, maybe it wasn't Daily Nightly. It was something. Maybe it was Don't Call on Me. I'm sorry. Don't Call on Me. Sing like that. Yep. Daily Nightly reminded me, who's singing that, John? Who's singing Daily Nightly?
That's Mickey Dolenz.
Okay.
Mickey Dolenz is their normal singer. He only sings 3 on this, but they're 3 biggest singles on this album. Yeah.
So I thought the Daily Nightly, man, at times I thought this was Grace Slick and Jefferson Airplane.
Yes. Well, remember, the Monkees are basically an homage band, right? And that's what they get knocked for. But as you mentioned, if you can homage many of these artists, well, that's saying something,
Yeah. So I like that. And I thought that there was a good variety on here. It's like I said just a minute ago about the 70s kind of orchestration. That's in a couple of songs, but then they do some psychedelic stuff with like words, which the beginning of that sounded like it could have been an interlude in an Austin Powers movie or something like that.
Yep, absolutely.
So the only thing obviously that doesn't make any sense on here, which I get, which is the Peter Percival thing, which is just like kind of like I don't know, it's Peter Tork goofing around on a microphone, which is, but overall I really did like this. This was a fun record to listen to.
And you didn't even mention the single off of this album, Pleasant Valley Sunday, which is by far the biggest song.
Yeah, that's the only one that I knew for sure. Yeah. And that's great, so that's I like it when they bury the single deep in the album. You know what I mean? Like sometimes
they did.
Yeah, and if you listen to the single, if you buy an album, at least back in the day, right? You buy a record, it's like, oh, I know this single, and then you front load it 1, 2, or 3. If you put it towards the end, it just gives you something to look forward to. So I find that kind of keeps you interested longer, at least me, than if you front load it with the single. So I do appreciate when artists do that. They put it towards the back end. And I would say Star Collector probably could have cut off all that crap at the end where there's a bunch of noise going on.
That's the Moog synthesizer.
Yeah,
man.
It's a little bit of that's fine, but I don't know if you needed the minute and a half, 2 minutes of it, whatever they were doing with it. But
yes.
This was good, man. This is you could hear a lot of different voices. You could hear a lot of different genres. It moved around. It wasn't ever dull. It kept your attention, and it's a lot of catchy stuff. So I enjoyed it.
Are you with me and the Beatles, who are very well-known fans of the Monkees? The Beatles themselves, they found the Monkees to be a very entertaining TV show and homage. They actually, not only do they not take things personally from the Monkees, they actually threw them a party the first time they went over to England to do some shows. And as I said before, George Harrison was very good friends with Peter Tork. In fact, Peter Tork came on, and Mickey Dolenz was actually part of John Lennon's Lost Weekend.
Yes,
he was one
that's
of the
right. I
people
forgot
there.
about that.
Yep.
That's right.
And Michael Nesmith was all over the place with Paul McCartney, who considered himself to be a fan, and actually even had talked to him about writing a song for the Beatles on an album. So interestingly enough, the Beatles themselves probably were a little bit less harsh on the Monkees than the music critics of the day were.
Yeah, so I only know this album. I like this album, so in that sense, yes, I'm on board that this is good stuff. But I never was. I don't ever recall a time where I'm like, oh, the Monkees, they're terrible or whatever. I didn't understand, right? I didn't understand that they could have been had, I don't know, more reputable music or anything like that. So they were kind of just there, really. I didn't really think much of them, but I did associate them with the TV show. Oh, and I also want to say that when the cuddly toy, I was listening to that, and my wife goes, "This sounds like an eHarmony commercial." It's got the jumpy piano kind of thing, and it does sound like a little bit commercial-like.
I want you to do me a favor. I want you to print off the lyrics for Cuddly Toy, and I want you to show that to your wife again and ask her if it's eHarmony or if it's perhaps more Tinder than eHarmony. So
yeah, that's a good point.
And one thing I'll add at the end before we wrap it up, remember that Daydream Believer was supposed to be on this album. But
really?
The record company at the last second held it back because they wanted to have a guaranteed single for the next album. So when they were going out and playing this album, they were playing this album and they were also adding in Daydream Believer as another song as part of their repertoire.
So they didn't.
And this album, along with Daydream Believer and Headquarters, the album I mentioned before, was the soundtrack for the second season of the Monkees television show, the second and final one.
So they didn't want to put Daydream and Believer on this because they already felt like they had enough singles?
The record company held it back. No, I don't know if they thought they had enough singles. They just wanted basically something they could advertise on the next album. And they felt Daydream Believer was a home run, both because it's a great song and because at the time Davy Jones was considered to be the bankable Monkee, which is funny because Mickey Dolenz sings so many more of the famous Monkee songs. But
I think Davy Jones songs. Well, I obviously I liked what was the second? What was that song that I liked? The second song, I forget the name of it.
She Hangs Out.
She Hangs Out. I really like that one. I thought the other ones. I think, with the exception of that, I think the Davy Jones songs might have been my least favorite as a whole. What were your? Do you have any least favorite tracks on this?
I love this album. I love Words. I love What Am I Doing Hanging Around. I love She Hangs Out. The thing I like most about this album is that I don't think, without the spoken word is what it is. It's kind of a joke, but I actually don't think there's a song on this album that's a true skip. I think it's, as you said, I think the best part of this album is they're all over the place trying out different genres, which is an unforeseen strength of it, because when you're doing a TV show and you're mimicking the trends of the time to some degree, you are delving around. It's like in no way. But do you remember the show Kids Incorporated?
I sure do.
How they would do different songs, every single one, and the idea was to, here's a little bit of what constitutes rap right now and pop and here we'll do like a U2 song. It's that idea. The Monkees were kind of doing that, albeit with, I think, a lot more polish, and you can't argue with songwriters. I mean, they were bringing in A+ talent.
And again, it's a short album, right? 35 minutes or whatever. If there's a song on here or a type of direction that they go into that you're not feeling, just hang in there for a couple minutes and you'll get to the next. You know what I mean? Like, it doesn't. I like the way that it flows. I think I pay attention to that with records. Is how one song leads into the next, and I really did like the fact that this is jumping around, that I'm hearing different sounds in here. And even some of the songs I didn't like as much. There's still. I wouldn't say there's any duds. I still liked them. It's just I didn't like them as much. Did
I make a Monkees fan out of you?
I would. I'm definitely wanting to check out more for sure. It does look like there's a lot of stuff on Spotify. It's one of those things where you're trying to sift through what the actual albums are versus what the compilation is, or the live, or the the kind of stuff that's just thrown together. So, but obviously you could probably just look on the internet and find out the true albums. Do you have any? Do you happen to? You kind of let a little teaser out there. Who else was denied a spot on the show aside from Steven Stills? Do you have any? Do you have that off the top of your head?
I don't have it in front of me.
Oh, okay.
I'll try to bring it back in our next episode when we do another one of the short episodes. But when you mentioned Steven Stills, I did. I immediately, he was on the list. So
well, that could be
a
teaser for the listeners. They can do their homework. They can.
You got it. Let us know. Let us know if there's anybody you find out. I will go in and find out some of the names that are famous of folks that did not make the Monkees show. But I would argue they kind of got it right. They have a special place in my heart in terms of as a pop band, and I'm glad that you liked them. It's I thought you might, but you never know.
Yeah, no, I definitely did. And it was, you know what, I don't think I walked into this thinking, oh God, I have to do it. I was expecting to like it because we talked about this. I've known you for years and you've mentioned that forever. And I just never went ahead to listen to stuff before, but I didn't expect to dislike this. So I wouldn't say that I was surprised or disappointed. It was what I expected it to be, and it was good. You're right.
Gotcha. Well, awesome. So I would say, wrapping it up this week, for me personally, I would say that I would strongly recommend the Monkees album, and I would give a slight recommend to the Byrds album. Where do you stand, Matt?
Yeah, I think the Monkees is more. It's probably more of a universal recommend. I think there's a lot of things that it's hitting on that if you're a fan of rock and pop and different, psychedelic music, that there's a lot of things going on here. The Byrds album is more of a straight, this is the sound you're going to get throughout the entire album. And if country, those three things, the fiddle, the banjo, the slide guitar, if they're not your thing, then stay away from it. If you like that stuff, I definitely high recommend.